I'm David Madison. I'm the Associate Curator of Education here at the Rollins Museum of Art. Welcome. Tonight's program is funded through the support of the Thomas P. Johnson Distinguished Visiting Scholar Program, which brings experts across disciplines to the campus to share their research with our students and the wider community. The lecture is titled, Who's in Charge Here? Sharing Authority with Young Children in Museums. And it is the keynote public program for our exhibition, Symbolic Languages, Children's Understandings of the Collection, which is on view through May 11th. If you haven't had a chance to explore the exhibition, I, of course, encourage you to do so. It's designed not only for young visitors, but for the young at heart. Symbolic Languages was collaboratively curated with 50 children at the Laboratory Preschool of the Rollins College Student Research and Child Development Center. I'm grateful to the center's executive director, Dr. Alice Davidson, and Director Diane Doyle for their support and contributions to this special project. The exhibition booklet that's out on your seats right now includes a research essay that they wrote about a study they conducted in connection with this exhibition. Our effort was inspired by the 2022 exhibition, Clyfford Still Art in the Young Mind, which our visiting scholar, tonight's speaker, Nicole Cromartie, curated along with 250 children between the ages of 6 months and 8 years old. And I had the pleasure of seeing Clyfford Still Art in the Young Mind when it was on view in 2022. And it was a really moving experience for me. I was at a shift in my career as a museum educator, and I was very much so at this point somewhat disillusioned with museums and their roles in our society. And I was walking through the Clyfford Still Museum's galleries that day, and I was just so impressed by not only the show's content, but by the museum's overall dedication to honoring the perspectives of children. Their profound understandings of art, of course, and by extension, our world. And it accomplished what all great exhibitions really should do, which is it energized me and it really affected my way of understanding art. So I hope and I know that tonight's presentation will also inspire you in a similar way. It's my sincere honor to introduce Nicole Cromartie, Director of Learning and Engagement at the Clyfford Still Museum in Denver, Colorado. Nicole is a leading advocate for early learning in museums, whose research focuses on the best practices for engaging young visitors from birth to 14 months. She holds a BA in art history from the University of Florida and an MA in curatorial practice from California College of the Arts. She is the author of Evaluating Early Learning, Planning for Our Youngest Visitors, and has held roles at institutions including the High Museum of Art, the Center for Civil and Human Rights, and the University of Denver. Nicole is currently pursuing a doctorate in early childhood education, and she will also be a Getty Museum guest scholar in 2025, conducting research for her next book on young children and the arts. Please help me welcome with applause our Thomas P. Johnson Distinguished Visiting Scholar, Nicole Cromartie.
Thank you so much for that lovely introduction, David. I am beyond thrilled to be here with all of you tonight and be a visiting scholar and share my work here. It's such a treat to be here in my home state of Florida and be in community with others who are really passionate about making children visible and having them participate in society. It's been really an incredible whirlwind day, spending time with students here and hearing about the different ways that they worked with the museum, they work with children at the CDC, and hearing just how incredible the experience of going to Rollins College is for all of them. I'd really like to thank all of you for joining me in person tonight and everyone who's joining online as well. Okay, so I am visiting from this museum in Denver, Colorado, where, as David mentioned, I'm the Director of Learning and Engagement at the Clyfford Still Museum, which is pictured here. The museum opened in 2011 to preserve and display the work of just one abstract expressionist artist named Clyfford Still. For the last 6 years, I've overseen our educational strategy initiatives for visitors of all ages. I'm also a doctoral student, as he mentioned, at the University of Colorado, Denver, where I study leadership for educational equity with a focus in early childhood education. My research explores sharing authority with young children, equitable museum and school partnerships, and museum program evaluation. I'm really looking forward to joining the Getty Museum Scholar Program this spring, where I'll spend 3 months researching with a co-authored book with my mentor and really the leading scholar on early childhood in museums, Sharon Schaefer. So that's a little bit about me. It's really just such an honor, I can't describe, to celebrate Symbolic Languages, children's understanding of the collections, and to actually see it in person. I've been hearing about it for so long now. And I think this exhibition really, good job. This exhibition represents sort of the latest chapter in museums collaborating with our communities, empowering our youngest members to share their perspectives. Tonight, I will explore a little bit about this history behind this initiative and connect it to 2 different exhibitions at the Clyfford Still Museum. And I hope all of you've seen this exhibition, right, so far. Yes, okay, beautiful. Do run across the hall after the show, if not. Okay, so collaborating with young children was something I never set out to do in my career. So I want to set the stage for how all of this happened and how I came to end up at this podium with all of you tonight. So to set the stage, we have to go back to 2010 in Atlanta, Georgia, at the High Museum of Art, where at that time I was the coordinator of museum interpretation there. And my primary responsibility was developing interpretation. So wall text like this, audio guide content, tours, interactives, training our docent corps to give tours, really to support all of our visitors and having a meaningful experience at the museum. It was an incredible opportunity to work with such a large collection at such an incredible institution, but I was still very focused on adult audiences. In 2011, just a year after I started this job, I was visiting my sister Kelly and her then 6-month-old daughter Parker, who both of them are pictured on the top right of this slide, in our hometown of Jacksonville, Florida. Kelly and I decided to visit the Cummer Museum of Art. Have any of you been there? Okay, a good amount. It's so fun being in Florida. You have all the context for these stories. Kelly and I decided to visit the Cummer, which was a place that our grandmother took us to really often when we were children growing up in Jacksonville. My sister, who was then a new first-time mom, and I did not really anticipate that Parker would get anything out of this visit. It was really just going to be an opportunity for us grown-ups to reconnect and spend some time together. Parker would be in the stroller. It would be very calm and fun. When we entered the first gallery, I realized immediately that we had been completely wrong. While holding Parker in my arms, I saw her making eye contact with sculptures, with painted portraits. She was squealing at 3D sculptures. Her eyes lit up when she saw shiny, metallic, textured objects. She was smiling. She was squealing the whole time. Kelly and I were totally in awe of what was happening. And this was the beginning of me learning to see differently. The interpretation department at the High Museum did not develop interpretation for families with infants, which was very uncommon at the time. It was a concept and audience that I'd never considered. But here at the Cummer Museum, Parker was making connections on her own. But how? And about what? That day, my career and focus on adult audiences changed forever. I was determined to make sense of this experience with my young niece and explore how art museum programming could influence infants' lives, as well as how infants, in turn, could shape museum practices. I soon discovered that infant programming in museums, especially art museums, was rare. But families have always been in art museums, right? Just traditionally on the walls, like in this painting of Madonna and Child. The Western Conception Museum was born from the European private collections of objects acquired from so-called newfound worlds. Wealthy collectors filled these cabinets of curiosity with manufactured objects like art and religious historical relics, alongside exotic specimens from the natural world like taxidermy shells and gems. These objects were collected by and displayed for the elite classes. The practice of viewing other cultures through a Western cultural lens firmly roots museums as a part of the colonial project. In the 18th century, museums started opening to the public across Europe, which marked the beginning of a museum as we know them today. And these public museums, planning for young children was non-existent. Several scholars have traced the history of young children in American museums. In 2012, Mary Ellen Munley produced a literature review on early learning in museums. In it, she cites the founding of the Brooklyn Children's Museum in 1899 as the beginning of American museums serving as a resource for children. Sharon Schaefer, however, cites the opening of the Children's Room and the Smithsonian Castle in 1901 as the first attempt to engage children in museum objects, claiming that the planning for this installation in a traditional museum began in 1889. Schaefer positions this development as an important precursor for other traditional museums like history, science, and art to welcome children. Indeed, the Children's Room aimed to excite, quote, excite the wonder and curiosity of children and employed new exhibition design strategies that one would not have seen in a traditional museum at the time. Examples of how the exhibitions of objects were made more accessible include simple descriptive texts replacing the scientific Latin labels, special exhibit cases designed so that children could better view the objects, and brightly colored walls, floor, and ceiling. I only recently came across this color image of the Children's Room and was just thrilled to see the actual color happening in this gallery space. Building on the success of museums dedicated to children and their families, more children's museums opened in the US, including the Boston Children's Museum in 1913, followed by the Children's Museum of Indianapolis in 1925. In 1988, the Smithsonian Institution founded an early learning program. Infants, toddlers, kindergarten, and preschool students visited museums on the National Mall, such as the Smithsonian Air and Space Museum and the National Gallery, just as a part of their regular school day. Can you imagine? This became a national model, demonstrating that young children could have meaningful experiences in traditional museums, not just museums designed specifically for children. I am indebted to Sharon Schaefer for most of this history. I just wanted to also point out this quote from Secretary Smith of the Smithsonian, Samuel P. Langley, who was really credited for having this vision for the Children's Room. He said, if children were to benefit from educational possibilities which existed in museums, a different approach to exhibition design would be necessary. That truly is the spark that led to so much of the work that's happened since this time period. Okay, we're flashing through history now. First published in 1992, the American Association of Museums, Excellence and Equity, Education, and the Public Dimension of Museums was a call to rethink the role of education in museums and museums' exclusionary history. The report centered on three key concepts: the commitment to education as central to museums' public service, which must be clearly expressed in every museum's mission and pivotal to every museum's activities. This was huge. Museums must become more inclusive spaces that welcome diverse audiences, but first, they should reflect our society's pluralism in every aspect of their operations and programs. Dynamic, forceful leadership from individuals, institutions, and organizations within and outside museum community is the key to fulfilling museums' potential for public service in the coming century. There is an explicit call to serve young children as young as preschool age in the publications. Quote, museums have the capacity to contribute to formal and informal learning at every stage of life, from the education of children in preschool through secondary school to the continuing education of adults. The museum field still has a long way to go to recognize and fulfill the vision of excellence and equity, but reckoning with the Eurocentric and colonial epistemologies of museums and museum practice is an important step for museums striving to reach these goals, As a field, we've struggled still to create a welcoming space for children younger than preschool age. You can read more about the history of the relationship between museums and children in David Madison's fantastic introductory essay in the exhibition publication, which you now all have. Highly recommend that. Okay, we're going to flash forward again to the museum's opening in downtown Denver in 2011. Having such an intact collection of a single artist's work, we have 93% of everything that Clyfford Still ever created. The Clyfford Still is truly a special place, but for so many, Clyfford Still was unknown. Unlike other single artist museums with less intact collections, like the Georgia O'Keeffe or Salvador Dali, the museum had to work hard to get the word out about Still and his pioneering work in abstraction. That was the focus of the museum's first decade, was really reintroducing Clyfford Still to our potential audiences. When I started my role at CSM in 2019, the museum had just completed 2 phases of audience research to understand and build audiences at CSM. These were the first 2 reports that were handed to me when I started my job. I was delighted to see a commitment and investment in evaluation and a desire to understand existing and potential audiences' perspectives. These were a few of my key takeaways. People who participated in this evaluation cited a need for diversity. I worry that a single artist museum may not have enough diverse perspectives, while others said they didn't feel like they had a starting point or a feeling of missing out on the complexity of the work. While others wondered, was CSM for them, or a difficulty imagining less savvy art friends and family enjoying CSM. Slaver Lonette's recommendations included providing additional guidance to help people approach abstract art. The team at CSM was considering different ways that they might approach this. From both my personal experiences with children and my professional work in museums, at this point, I had begun to see young children, especially our youngest, as some of our most confident interpreters of art. Children are naturally keen observers. They engage deeply with a single work of art, spending time examining it and discussing it with their friends and family. I also noticed that their responses of art extended beyond just looking and talking. They expressed themselves through art making, movement, making sound in response to these works. Their joy and curiosity were evident as they explored artworks, and I am struck by their confidence in grappling with complex issues, such as fairness and equality in civil rights photography, and their ability to create stories around both representational and abstract works. Still refused to title his works, instead assigning them reference numbers. This was one way that Still was anti-authoritarian. He didn't want to predetermine the work's meaning to viewers, leaving it up to them to interpret. But Slaver Lonette revealed that our audiences didn't feel empowered by Still's attempt at sharing authority. They still didn't feel like they had a starting point to interpret the work. I had learned so much about experiencing and interpreting art from just being with children. Maybe the Clyfford Still Museum's visitors would too. The Clyfford Still Museum's collection presented an incredible opportunity. I started to consider the connections between what we know about children's aesthetic preferences and Still's work. Maybe it could be a jumping off point for further exploration. I should say this is also like one of the most beloved works in our collection. I don't remember the PH number right now. It might be PH 247, but it's been nicknamed Big Blue. So I wanted to share just a little bit of some of the research that I was looking at in the early days of thinking about how we might help some of our visitors, general visitors, come to the museum and feel really empowered to interpret Still's work. The first piece of research comes from visual development rather than aesthetic preference. Because our eyesight is blurry for the first few months of life, babies really like looking at things with high contrast, so areas where black meet white. As our eyes developed, red is the first color we can discern. Still painted many high contrast paintings utilizing black, red, white, and bare canvas. You're going to see this in Symbolic Languages too. So students in Colorado begin to explore the concept of pattern or repeating design in preschool, but research suggests we are drawn to patterns from infancy. We look for patterns, even as adults, everywhere around us, whether it's a face on the moon or a hungry monster in an abstract drawing. You will see 4 different artworks representing faces to various degrees of representation in the Symbolic Languages exhibition. Still's early career was really marked by representational paintings. This was very early on, a self-portrait from 1923. Still made an incredible amount of oil pastels on bright, just regular from the store construction paper, similar to the one shown here. I really love this piece of research that children under the age of 4 respond to images that they themselves could create. This is not to say that there is an incredible skill and in these works on construction paper by Still, but just that very young children can better relate to them. They are materials that children often have access to. The mark making is something that they themselves could make. We'll talk more about this later, but I really got stuck on this piece of research. Several studies reveal young children's preference for abstract artworks, and a majority of our collection is abstract painting. Abstract artwork was also selected by the curators in Symbolic Languages. As noted, and I hope you're not embarrassed, Dr. Alice Davidson and Diane Turo Doyle's essay on art appreciation, color also tends to be a really dominant criterion for identifying a favorite work of art among young children. Young children have color preferences, which can be based on all different kinds of connections, their culture, their mood, their emotions. However, researchers have discovered that young children love highly saturated colors, regardless of their hue. And you can read more about that in the exhibition publication as well. And then one more piece of research that I was really interested in. While children under the age of 5 generally love art with bright colors and abstract forms, as we grow up, we begin to find real connections to art that depicts recognizable subjects from the world around us. We also begin to judge art based on the artist's ability to make realistic looking images. And Clyfford Still spent, as I mentioned, his early career depicting the world around him. He grew up in rural Alberta and Washington State on farmlands. And so a lot of what you're seeing is from that location. So while this was interesting research, I was curious about the young children in our own community thought. Would they be interested in Still's work as the research suggested? I proposed that we work with young children via partnership with their teachers on developing an exhibition at the Clyfford Still Museum. We can only show the work of Clyfford Still at our museum. I should have mentioned that too. But we were really excited to get their take on Clyfford Still's body of work. I invited CSM's curator, Bailey Plotchek, to co-curate with me, and we aim to involve young children at every infants through age 8 on every level of the exhibition's development. So thinking about object selection, the interpretation, even thinking about programming and press interviews. This wasn't meant to be a cute performative project, but an experiment in authentically sharing authority with community, in particular, a community that had previously been excluded from the Clyfford Still Museum, and of course, many other museums. Bailey and I identified a single big idea for the show. Young children are equal stakeholders and capable collaborators at CSM who bring valuable perspectives in reframing the collection, exhibitions, and the museum experience as a whole. This big idea guided our decisions throughout the development of the show, and you're going to see this child over and over again. I was telling David she was our superstar curator who volunteered to contribute to all different aspects of the development. Her name's Lydia. We reached out to potential partners, including thought partners in early childhood who would challenge us and support us in our thinking. And working during the COVID-19 pandemic, we worked closely with teachers to identify strategies for children to take ownership of selecting the objects and sharing their perspectives, even when they didn't have access to the museum itself. Our first day of collaboration, I will never forget, was with an infant classroom in one of our neighborhood schools, Catholic Charities Mariposa. We sent around 20 reproductions of Still's most high contrast paintings, prominently featuring black, white, and red. Based on what we knew about visual development, we really hoped our young co-curators would enjoy the bright colors and abstract shapes, but having never explored our collection with infants, we had no idea what was about to happen. Additionally, we relied on standard paper-sized reproductions, not the immersive, often wall-sized explosions of color and texture, which is what it's like to experience a Clyfford Still in real life. Determined to make it work, as we all were during the pandemic, we forged ahead. My collaborator and I joined the classroom via Zoom and observed as teachers presented each individual child with sets of paintings to choose from. They asked, which one do you like? While holding up 2 different reproductions, the PH numbers were printed on the back so we could see from the Zoom which one they were looking at. One of the teachers asked, what do you think about this one? And gestured to the reproduction in her other hand. Ava again points to the selection that she chose and continues to look at it. So I'm going to play this video and let you just see a tiny snippet of what we experienced on that first meeting.
Okay. Pictures. Okay. What do you think?
What do you think, Ava?
What do you think of those?
Which picture do you
Right.
like?
No, thank you. Hi, Ava, do you like these?
Oh,
What do you think?
Oh,
Yeah.
yes.
Cool.
Do you like that one? Or do you like that one? Do you like that one?
Yeah.
Nice.
Pretty decisive, wouldn't you say? We had, during our 3-year development process of the show, we had a handful of people who couldn't quite wrap their heads around the idea that we were co-curating an entire gallery of high contrast paintings of Clyfford Still with infants. And all we had to do was show them this video or other videos with infants making selections so they could see themselves how decisive they were. It was like a light bulb went off every time. Really incredible. So we decided to display this in the gallery with the works of art so that our visitors could experience this as well. Another highlight from the development process was meeting Cassandra, who was in preschool at the time. While looking at a reproduction of Still's PP 1454, which you see on the right, she got inspired to create her own version, exclaiming, "Me gustan las rayitas," or "I like the little lines." She was not asked to replicate the painting. That was not what we were doing. We were not asking children to try to recreate any of Clyfford Still's work. This was something that she did on her own. And it was incredible to see this research about young children preferring work that they themselves could create, play out right in front of our eyes, or that's how we interpret it anyway. The moment also reminded me of that cliche line you hear all the time, sometimes when people are talking about abstract work, my kid could do that. And it's meant derogatory, implying that the work in question didn't require skill or training to produce. But young children like Cassandra flip that on its head. They say, I could do that. And that's an empowering thing. Clyfford Still is an artist who has all of this artwork in a museum. I must be an artist too. So that has just been an incredible part of the process to see how powerful some of Still's drawings were to our young co-curators. And I should say at the opening of the show, Cassandra brought her entire family to the opening, multiple generations, and it was just, they were just beaming with pride. It was incredible to see. Okay, so now jump towards the actual exhibition. This is the title wall. The text you'll notice was lowered to child's height. We included English and Spanish, which I see that you do all too, side by side. This was the first for the Clyfford Still Museum to honor some of our co-curators' home languages. And we kicked off the intro text with a quote from one of our second grade co-curators. It's at the very top. It says, "I was wowed when I saw the huge canvas. I like the style. It's just cool." And that was from a co-curator that we had been online with for 2 years and was looking at essentially thumbnails of Clyfford Still's work, reproductions. We tried projections. But when he actually came into the museum, he said, wow, this is a huge canvas, just completely blown away, having an experience with art for the first time. at the museum was incredible. Each label in the exhibition also began with the child's perspective, and smaller paintings in the exhibition were also installed at a lower hang height to make the artworks more physically accessible. Another feature of the exhibition that we were really proud of is the way we could make co-curators be seen and heard throughout the space. So visitors to the exhibition could listen to the voices of our curators in both English and in Spanish and our audio experiences, and see videos of our curators who use American Sign Language interpreting the works on display using QR codes in the galleries on their own smartphones. I have to show you the high contrast gallery that resulted from the work that we did with our infant co-curators. We actually kicked off the whole exhibition with the high contrast gallery. We worked with 3 different infant classrooms to select these paintings. Another switch we made for the show was flexible seating. So typically we have steel architectural benches, not unlike the ones you're sitting on right now. But for Young Mind, we brought in carpet squares and felt poofs in every other gallery of the exhibition. This allowed for families to sit and lie comfortably while viewing the paintings. We also saw many babies crawling on the carpet throughout the show. According to the summative evaluation of the exhibition, 68% of our general visitors said that this flexible seating enhanced their experience. We worked with the preschool students at Boulder Journey School in Boulder, Colorado, to help us imagine an interactive activity for the galleries. Their teachers set up provocations or open-ended invitations to different experiences, a concept from the Reggio Emilia approach, to understand the children's preferences and engaging with light and color. We observed the children playing for weeks, manipulating materials, collaborating on installations, and sharing their discoveries with us. Their explorations resulted in an entire gallery dedicated to interaction. There are 3 light boxes here installed with document cameras that were connected to a projector. We provided colorful materials to compose with, including scarves, the ever popular colored cellophane, yarn, and transparencies of Clyfford Still's work. The children's creations were projected onto the wall at a scale comparable to Still's, which was really exciting. We had babies crawling across the light table surface and adults experimenting with texture throughout the exhibition. Ever since this exhibition has been deinstalled with the show, we've had questions about when is it coming back? I'll just jump to one more gallery I want to highlight in the exhibition. The final gallery of the exhibition was a celebration of color, which you will also see here. What we hoped would honor research stating that early learners prefer highly saturated colors no matter their hue. And inspired by our co-curators' expressed wish to be surrounded in rainbows, the mostly monochromatic paintings were arranged in a Roy G. Biv pattern around the room. It was a joyful conclusion to the show. As visitors exited the exhibition, they encountered one final message from Olivia, a preschool student at Boulder Journey School and one of the children who worked on the show. We can make our own rainbow. Olivia proudly proclaimed this as she and her friends arranged a series of colored lights on the floor in their school. I want to highlight one of the paintings and one of the interpretations in this color gallery. We asked the children various questions, our verbal curators, various questions about the paintings to prompt responses that we could use in the wall text and the audio guide. 2 of the questions that garnered some of the most compelling reactions were, how does this painting make you feel? And if this painting could make a sound, what would it sound like? So glad that we have all of that recorded. During this collaboration, 5 major wildfires were burning in Colorado. Marley, a kindergarten student, used the discussion of this red painting as a jumping off point to discuss something that was present in her life. She said, "It reminds me of a forest fire that I saw on TV before. It looks cool, and it's also sad for the trees." I love this quote for many reasons, but primarily because it reminded me of the power of abstract art in particular to be a launch pad for difficult conversations. During the run of the show, Marley's dad was a chaperone to the museum for her school's field trip. He cried while reading his daughter's words on the walls of the museum, and I'm sure he was not the only one. So once we opened to the public, we continued our relationships with our curators and kind of gauged their interest in ongoing participation in the show. 4 of our elementary school aged curators volunteered to both design and facilitate curatorial tours for the public. They worked closely with education staff mentors and developed tour stops incorporating art making, storytelling, and games. These tours sold out immediately and included their families and also just curious Clyfford Still fans. Another elementary age curator, Lydia, who I mentioned earlier, volunteered to do an interview with the local press. Her conversation resulted in the publication. Kids curated the Clyfford Still Museum's latest exhibit and proved they understand abstract art better than adults in a local culture magazine called Denverite. Following the publication, I asked if she was more interested in visiting museums after this project or if she felt about the same. Lydia said, yeah, I want to go to more and in different places. Like instead of Denver, maybe somewhere in New York. I am pretty certain that Lydia someday will have my job, and I feel really great about that. So I wanted to highlight a little bit more about our summative evaluation that we did of the exhibition, which I've talked about kind of throughout this presentation. It involved both exit surveys and interviews with people who come to the exhibition. We learned a lot about our different aspects of exhibition design, but most importantly, we learned that the vast majority of adults reported feeling more confident in their interpretations of Still's work after visiting the exhibition. We're a small museum, maybe about the same size as this museum would be my guess. They're spending, what, 30 minutes, an hour in the space, but they left feeling differently about their own capacities to experience this work. This was such powerful data for us. Experiencing children's perspectives, coming out the other side with a new level of confidence was really an issue that the Still have been trying to solve since its opening in 2011. Oh, can imagine that was really thrilling to see. I just wanted to share one of the excerpts from one of the evaluation interviews with an adult who just experienced the exhibition. I don't know if at ease is the right word. Children's thoughts and quotes put you at ease to interpret in a more free-flowing way than it should mean this or that. Kids are very upfront about how they interpret art, so it allows you that freedom. It was so interesting just this morning, David, I didn't tell you this, but we had a group of students in the exhibition, and David did this incredible exercise where they were observing the work and responding to it, essentially. And one of the students said, I came into this work feeling really frustrated, like I didn't have an entry point. And seeing the child's perspectives made me feel more free. This idea of freedom and that children provide us this freedom in being with art and being in museum spaces is just incredible. Something I'm really just starting to understand. There's so much also that I could say about the transformation that occurred at the Clyfford Still Museum and over the course of the 3-year development. CSM has since changed many of its ongoing practices and developed new initiatives in light of the exhibition and the evaluation. To continue the multi-directional flow of learning and model intuitive, open-ended interpretation of Still's work, CSM staff has worked together to incorporate children's perspectives in some form or another in every exhibition since Young Mind. These quotations and responses from the children are then integrated into the museum's collection management system, alongside the views of scholars, historians, and other museum professionals, reinforcing equitable standards internally. I've spent a lot of time in museum databases, and I've never seen a perspective of an artwork by a child. So this feels huge to me. We now also integrate behind the scenes documentation of exhibition development like you saw with young Ava for use in our gallery spaces from many of our exhibitions as well, seeing how powerful it was for our visitors to see that process. CSM has also lowered its standard hang height for both artwork and text. We've continued to incorporate bilingual text in all of our exhibitions. We instituted a Touch This book, which you see on the lower left, which was created for the exhibition in consultation with the Anchor Center for Blind Children as a resource for visitors of all ages and abilities to touch both bare canvas, primed canvas, and painted canvas. And we see now that visitors from all backgrounds and ages love this tactile experience. So we're updating that book for every exhibition moving forward. As a part of the programming for the exhibition, we launched Art Crawl, a tour of the museum for infants and their caregivers as a twice-monthly program. It's for children up to 14 months and their caregivers. It's part tour, part mixer. CSM educators lead families in a crawl through the galleries in each monthly session. They encourage interactive discussions on the importance of introducing your babies to art at an early age and tips for experiencing art together. As a result of community demand and thanks to some generous funding, we've expanded this program to 3 instances per month in the museum. We've also designed a mobile version that can go to different community sites, including schools and libraries around Denver. And we even recently licensed the program to the Montgomery Museum of Art. So babies in Alabama can go to their own art crawl at the MMFA. And this really was also made in direct response to what we were hearing from our community during the development of the exhibition, which, as I've mentioned, was during the pandemic. And so many new parents, young families talked about the isolation that they were experiencing. They were looking for something to do with their children that felt meaningful and engaging, but also would help them connect with other families. When this program first launched, staff across departments were really nervous, understandably, worried about the unknown. Now I'm really happy to report on Art Crawl program days. The staff during our morning huddles exclaimed, "It's baby day!" So I have to say our entire staff has been transformed by seeing the experiences of very young children in our gallery spaces. And I want to talk about one more thing that could not have happened without young minds. My collaborator, Bailey Plotchek, and I are currently working on another exhibition co-curated with young children set to open this September. And I'd like to share kind of a sneak preview of this work. I have not talked about this in public anywhere, but it's really just selfish in the hopes of luring you all to Denver during the run of the exhibition. Tell Clifford I Said Hi is an exhibition curated by the children of the Colville Confederated Tribes, which will take over all 9 of our museum's galleries, the whole museum. So we're currently working with children ages 3 to 14 and teachers from partner schools on the Colville Reservation in Washington State, again, on every level of the exhibition. And this exhibition, of course, continues our efforts to foster engagement with our collections by sharing authority on Still's work with the museum's critical communities. You might be wondering why we're working with children in Washington State. Where did that come from? Just a little background. While working as an instructor at the Washington State College, now Washington State University Fine Arts Department, Clyfford Still assisted in co-founding an art colony on the reservation and became one of its first instructors in the summers of 1937 and 1938. He held classes in Nespelem on the reservation. And so now these are 2 examples of the works. Our collections include 3 paintings on canvas, over 85 drawings and sketches on paper, and nearly 20 documentary photographs and other archival ephemera documenting Still's time in the area. These objects reveal how Still's experiences with the Colville community profoundly impacted his work. While culturally distinct and diverse, the 12 bands of the Confederated Tribes, Chelan, Chief Joseph Band of Nez Perce, Colville, Intiat, Lakes, Methal, Moses Columbia, Nespelem, Okanagan, Palouse, Van Poyle, and the Wenatchee share cultural practices and 1.4 million acres of land. CSM has had a relationship with the tribes for years, working with enrolled tribal members and official representatives to provide perspective on the objects that Still made during his time there. They've led programs, they've co-developed interpretation with us, And then 2 years ago, during a visit to the museum, our tribal advisors, we asked John Cyrus, who is the Traditional Territories Advisor, how he envisioned our partnership moving forward. And he said, I want you to involve our children. He went on to say that one of the most important things is whenever you have a body of knowledge, whether it's traditional or not, it doesn't mean much if you can't share it with the next generation. Bailey and I had just come off of co-curating Young Mind, and we proposed doing something similar with their children, and a new project was born. So we've been making regular trips up to the reservation in Washington, building relationships with our young co-curators, who we started with identifying objects for the exhibition. The children have connected pretty equally between the works that were created in their area and still later abstract works, which has been really exciting to see. But it's been really incredible seeing the children who have this connection to some of the works, reproductions of paintings of places that they recognize, like the construction of the Cooley Dam in the top left. Also, another highlight was seeing one of the students at Nespelem School run up to a portrait saying, "That's my great-great-grandmother." So we're getting a whole new perspective on this part of our collection. This exhibition investigates 6 themes that were determined by our co-curators, which is really exciting. We've been able to release even more authority with this group of students. One is our family, our culture. It looks really familiar. The imagination of paintings, the outside, love, and this painting story is about color. The title of the exhibition itself, Tell Clyfford I Said Hi, was also a contribution by a co-curator. As Bailey and I were leaving the school after a day of experiencing art, one of the students approached me and said, "Tell Clyfford I said hi." Clyfford Still to her was alive and working, someone that she had connected with through her experience with his art. So I'll close here to say that the story of my niece and Clyfford Still art in the young mind was largely about inclusion, about my shift and the understanding of what our youngest community members are capable of, mostly in terms of what they enjoy. It is the story of how aesthetic preference and family programs really became central to my work. In the past 5 years, sharing authority with community members, particularly the youngest among them, became vital to my projects and my ways of thinking. Co-curating with children is not just about understanding what our youngest community members enjoy, but what they can teach us and how they can lead us. So happy to take some questions. We have a little bit of time. Yes, they were both high contrast images by Clyfford Still. Sorry, that wasn't clear. So essentially they would get 2 different images by Clyfford Still over and over again. And when they showed preference, either by grabbing or gazing or pointing, we would sort of make a tally mark for that work. And then we added up all the tally marks for the different artworks. And those were the ones that we put in the gallery. That's a great question. How do you balance writing labels for children and adults, and does one get priority? I think the thing that Young Minds showed us through the evaluation was that writing a good label works for everyone, and that the perceptions of children, what helped our adults understand what it is to experience art. We had been writing labels for adults exclusively since the museum opened in 2011, and it wasn't until we incorporated the voices of children that adults felt like they were able to build a connection with Still's abstract work. That's a great question. Yeah.
2 questions. First of all, you mentioned that children have a better appreciation, ability to understand abstract art than adults. My question is, what do you mean by understand abstract art? And the other question, did you notice patterns in the evolution of the way children view art as they grow?
Okay, let's see if I can do this. 2 questions. Okay, the first one, I don't necessarily think that children can better understand abstract art. I think they approach abstract art in a very intuitive, confident way. And for adults who don't have a background in art history or art or just experience interpreting art, they themselves have said that they don't feel that same kind of confidence that we've seen in children. So I think that everyone, adults, children, people of all backgrounds and ages, come to abstract art with their own experience and their own backgrounds, and they all have something particular to bring to the work's interpretation, and they're all valuable and important. But what I think the children were modeling for adults was this freedom, free of feeling like you need to know art history or, of Clyfford Still's biography, that you can approach a work just from your own, I keep doing that, I'm sorry, just from your own experience as a human being. That's what they were modeling for the adults. But I do think that article was kind of taking a funny poke by saying that the children understood it better than the adults. I completely lost your second question. I'm sorry, what was it?
Okay. Did you see it
Oh, a pattern.
in the way children view art or interpret it or whatever you want to use?
It's a great question. I think some of my colleagues would have really interesting responses to this too. But it was interesting, this idea of children being drawn to work that they themselves could create and seeing how the work that children aim to create really changes over their lifetime, that they begin, we all make abstract works from the first time we could pick up any kind of drawing implementation, right? It's about color, it's about shape and form and texture. But then as we get older, we do start to try to represent the world around us. We want to draw our mom, we want to draw our house, we want to draw our dog, and we want it to look like the thing. And so that's something that really shifts over the course of early childhood from birth to age 8. And that is something you see as they become interested in creating the world around them. They want to see accurate depictions of the world around them too. And as with all things in child development, there are always exceptions. There's not really a rule around that, but it is definitely a pattern, as you said. Yeah, there is that pattern exists in the ways that children think about making art. And I think in turn, what they appreciate in other artists' work. Great question. Yeah. Please do. Yes. But it's so interesting to see that they have that experience. Oh, that's how the artist made it. But and then just like he's just going old, like they just needed the understanding, but then went their own feelings about how these materials. Yeah. I think the more they learn about how art can be created, the more they Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. Data on art because I think one of the things that is so wonderful about Clyfford is that they approve everything they're samples. Samples with scars. They're not concerned about how other people are doing them. They are not yet. Yeah. That's related to the C-level about lessons, there are so many transitions so on how they're doing art how they respond. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, working with adolescents has been so different, as you might imagine, as we are for this upcoming exhibition. And so far, it's looked like using different strategies. There's a lot less group discussions, a lot more kind of parent share and individual activities with the children, and spending time writing. But yeah, I mean, I think they're obviously making a lot of connections to their history and to their families and what they even already know about Still's involvement with the tribes. So yeah, it is a completely different experience, but yeah, I'm also excited to see what it looks like side by side with the preschool students because we're working with Head Start on the tribe too. Um, so I'm really excited. You know, we really covered early childhood in the first exhibition, and now we're going 3 to age 14. How does that make a cohesive show and interpretive plan and all of that kind of stuff? So yeah, you'll have to come. Yeah. Yeah, I put just a tiny bit of that in here. I mean, everyone was blown away. I think not only the parents, but also the teachers. There were teachers who agreed to be a part of this project, and I just assumed, oh, they've done a lot of interpretive art projects with their students before, and this just feels like a great fit. Turned out that was not the case. They were just in the pandemic and wanting an escape, wanting to try something new. So the teachers themselves who knew the students so well were also just completely blown away by their students' capacities to interpret abstract art. They were blown away by their preferences. I remember doing a tour for preschool teachers of the exhibition once it opened and them saying, none of our classrooms look like this, you know, in terms of how they were thinking about color and, you know, what the spaces looked like. None of them included abstract art. But yeah, it was really powerful to see all of the adults in these children's communities kind of have their eyes opened to what that they were capable of doing, and that it was validated by a museum context, which was a big deal for a lot of these families. Going on a curatorial tour by their second grade student, yeah, it's incredible. Not what you expect for sure, but they did an incredible job. I mean, across the board, they did an incredible job with programming, curation, press. So yeah, it's amazing to play a role in that. Yeah. Yeah. Thanks. Yeah.
I understand the nature of gallery rep. You're doing your abstract art.
Mm-hmm.
Gallery, crystal, painting, sound and light.
Yeah.
The same curve in terms of age, their regardless of here's evil, you know.
Yeah, I mean, I think you see that a little bit here. I think from my previous experiences, obviously, I had not curated with children prior to being at the Still, but what I had experienced looking at decorative arts, African art, self-taught art, all the different areas of the collection at the High. We had an infant program and a toddler program there. So I was regularly hearing the perspectives of very young children on all areas of the collection there. And also at the Center for Civil and Human Rights, looking at civil rights photography, Dr. King's letters and ephemera. I mean, yeah, I've learned so much about art in all different contexts from very young children. So yeah, I do think that a project like this could work at any kind of museum. I'm like looking at the online audience. If you want to think about curating with children at your museum, I highly recommend it. Because the more spaces that we're doing this kind of work, the more that we're learning about our own collections, the more we're learning about sharing authority with our communities, particularly ones who've been excluded from museum spaces. So yeah, yeah, just in the back.
How this type of approach starts work. Kind of activated in some way or help you greater make connections with biology. They Washington somehow. There's points of connection that are now for from the center of our
That's an interesting question. When I came to the Still and started doing all of this work, we also commissioned a local author and illustrator to create a children's book about Clyfford Still's life. And one of Clyfford Still's daughters, Sandra, is on our board and is very involved with the museum. We're really lucky to have her. I called her to kind of get her approval and just kind of her take on making a children's book about her father, and she laughed hysterically. Just could not believe that the man who would not allow her in his studio as a child was now going to have a children's book written about him. So that's been really interesting to discover, but she's been incredibly supportive about this work, and we've learned a lot about her perspectives on the tribal impact on his work and on him as a human being through Sandra, who's very, very supportive of this project, and just knowing how much the Colville tribes had an impact on him. One thing that has really come up for me is learning more about Still's anti-authoritarian perspectives on art, on the art world. I think I had previously thought it was really limited to him not titling his works and making that open space for interpretation. We had a scholar recently visiting the museum who's done a lot of work on Still's connection to anarchist movements. So he did have a more broad anti-authoritarian approach to thinking about his life, his career, which I just think connects so beautifully to the kind of work that we're doing. My hope is that he would have appreciated that we've thought about sharing authority in this more expansive way at the museum. So I don't know if that answered your question, but those are a couple things that kind of rise to the top through this process.